Having finished the last books in the Star Trek Litverse, the opening of each book in the Coda trilogy, which I'll review at a later date, contained a chronology of key events up to that point. With the Trek literary experiment as we know it at an end, I decided to go back and read some of the ones I'd missed. This was one of them. Initially discounted because of the cover, in this case, I think I should have listened to my instincts. Set in the period after Nemesis, the story follows the crew of the Enterprise along with some guest stars from Voyager in their quest to defeat a Borg cube thought already defeated, with the entire universe at risk once more. Based on Star Trek The Next Generation, it features the crew at a point after Nemesis when Riker and Troi have departed for the USS Titan, and Data has been destroyed at the hands of Shinzon as seen in the film Star Trek Nemesis. Primarily starring Captain Picard, Worf, Geordi, and Dr. Crusher, they are joined by several literary-only characters to round out the cast. By and large, I felt that Peter David doesn't capture the voices of our beloved characters well at all. In thought and deed, I felt it seemed very unlike all of them with the exception of Worf. While I think he does original characters in the Trek universe with a fair amount of skill, I do not believe he manages to sync with the flow of the stories and ideas that work well in the Trek universe as established post-Nemesis. Most of the characters not from the television series feel less out of place, but this is only because we have less to base their decisions on, so there is less likelihood of sensing an unnatural deviation. The characters that are original do not get along well with our established cast, and not simply because this is part of the plot. They are somewhat limited in their development, seeming to serve only one purpose, to be a discordant voice in the melody. The Borg cube is dead. Defeated by Captain Jean-Luc Picard, it has lain dormant for months. But Admiral Janeway is not satisfied and decides to go see for herself, despite warnings for her to do the exact opposite. Taking a science vessel to the cube's location, she is determined to make certain the cube is not a threat, but no matter what state they're in, the Borg are never to be taken lightly. As a connoisseur of Star Trek novels, I've read a lot of them, and over the years I've probably read just about every Trek author that's ever written for the media tie-in. But upon reading this novel, I was reminded of the state of Trek fiction back then, when it was more up to the individual authors doing standalone work, and it seems to have elements of it here, but I'll get into that later. First, I'll start by saying that the beginning of the book feels like a bait and switch. Officially listed as a Star Trek The Next Generation novel, it begins with most of the book focusing on Janeway and Seven of Nine. Now, while this was written during the time of the great literary interconnectivity of the span between Enterprise and Discovery, I thought it felt inappropriate to have only one chapter of the first 6 or 7 focus on the crew whose series this book was ostensibly a part of. Having read Peter David before, I know he knows how to work in the Star Trek universe, but I feel that a lot of his narrative choices were either self-referential to his own series and the Pantheon, but also to a novel written before the Star Trek literary universe was even an idea. As such, it feels very out of place in the grand scheme of things and does not sit well with me as someone who has read the vast majority of Trek novels during the time these books were set. Regarding the structure of the book, it would also be remiss of me not to mention that towards the conclusion, the entire final battle is broken up into more than a dozen single-page chapters, which to me seemed like a strange way to go about it. Without getting into the specifics, it just seemed very discordant in terms of flow. My overall impression was considerable disappointment, and I do not recommend it. For further insight, please continue to watch. The story involves a Borg threat to Earth, but unlike some of the more well-written novels using the slow boil technique, this one feels more like you can't wait for it to be over. Allegedly, the cube becomes sentient in and of itself, absorbing materials rather than traditional assimilation, becoming an unstoppable threat, and at the heart of it, Catherine Janeway. On a personal level, it bothered me that Janeway was brought in just to be assimilated, and the fact that it happened so easily. While the argument could be made that this was a special cube and she was simply unprepared, I expect better for Janeway. I mean, the amount of effort it took to get Picard, this felt like it was just nonsensical to me that it would happen without Janeway being able to, I don't know, it seemed like it should have taken a lot more effort than it did. I just didn't feel like the Borg were written consistently with previous appearances, nor Janeway or anyone else for that matter. Peter David is a talented author, let's get that right. But I feel, and I felt this, the more of the book I read, that he is not well suited to writing about the well-established characters in Trek. I remembered when I started reading it, having read some of his work in the past, that Peter David used to write his own Trek literary-only series called Excalibur, and most of the crew consisted of original characters or guest characters that had appeared on screen maybe once or twice, leaving a lot of room for interpretation. I always enjoyed the ones based on his own characters more than the ones where he tried to put his own spin on the Trek universe. Additionally, the book really felt just like a professionally done fan fiction in my view. The solution to the problem of the enhanced cube ended up being a reference to a book Mr. David had written a long time ago called Vendetta. At the time, I bought it easily because I was a sucker for any story involving the Borg, them being my all-time favorite Next Generation villains. The basic concept involved the Planet Killer, a device from the original series being designed as a weapon to destroy the Borg. Personally, I found this hard to buy, as it was never suggested in the series to be a habitable craft or to be designed for any purpose other than its base programming. Now, I do grant the fact that it could not have planned for the Borg, a storyline some 20-some-odd years later, but given that it was never seen other than that one episode and never in any other Borg media, that this was simply a non-starter. It was a device that seemed to be designed to eat planets and fuel itself with the rubble, and to suggest that it was designed to fight the Borg seemed counter to what would make sense in established canon. Add it to the fact that the story seemed like an excuse to reference his own book, complete with a guest spot from his own literary starship, not seen in the Trek literary universe for quite some time, and it really seemed like wish fulfillment on the part of the author rather than a well-written adventure for the fans. Long story short, I definitely was glad to be done with this one, and will stick to original fiction if I read anything Peter David.
Thanks for watching, and if you liked it, click the subscribe button and leave a comment below. You can also find me on Twitter and a few other places on the web, or support me via Patreon or Ko-fi. Zebra hugs!